the Snyderverse. We all know it, some of us love it, some of us hate it. Bottom line is, it's something that has permeated through comic book culture, specifically comic book movie culture, in the past few years, and I would like to talk about why most people hate it. And that, as you saw from the title, is continuity. You see, the Marvel Cinematic Universe set a staple in comic book culture. We have this huge universe where all the characters are interconnected, and for the most part, because Marvel does have its faults, I'm not going to lie, they adapt the characters from the mainline comics onto the big screen more or less accurately. So if you read a comic book with a character and then you go into the movies, you will see some sort of synergy between the two. And that is what people were expecting was going to happen when Zack Snyder took the helm and started making a cinematic universe out of the DC comic book characters. Unfortunately, that isn't what happened. Snyder had his own views and ideals on what he wanted to do with these characters in his movies, which is perfectly fine. I agree with freedom for the director and writers. However, it didn't fit in line with what people were expecting, and that's why most people ended up hating it. However, after rewatching the movies and giving it some thought, I've come to the realization that if it weren't for the fact that people were expecting a level of continuity, synergy with his movies and the comics, I think that they would have done really well. If Snyder's movies were Elseworld stories or standalone stories, I think they would have done well in the regards of fans liking them. So that's what I want to talk about over the course of this video, how his ideas could be used in a good way and how the movies he made, despite their faults, had a really good core that they could have worked with if they weren't tied down to connecting to the mainline continuity. So if that's something that interests you, I hope you stick around and let's get into it. Somebody when I first saw Man of Steel, I originally thought that it was too brooding and too dark and too grim, just for the sake of the fact that I know Superman. You know, Superman, although he isn't one of my top 3 favorite heroes, he's the best friend to my favorite superhero of all time, Batman. So I know a little bit about Superman. I've seen some of the animated movies and TV shows that he's been in, and I'm like, yeah, Superman's very happy. He's a very hopeful and, cheer-bringing person. And when I saw Man of Steel, it just felt like all of that personality and character was gone. And that's what turned me off of the film when I initially saw it. But now, going back years later, rewatching it with this ideology in mind, I actually did enjoy the movie a bit more. I still think it has some flaws, but outside of that, it still really works. Because you take out the fact that it's supposed to be the mainline universe that we're going to be branching off all of these stories from Justice League, Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, etc. from, and you just think of it as a standalone property, Man of Steel is actually a really interesting take on the character of Superman, because it's what if Superman was raised by a fearful Jonathan and Martha Kent? Because in Man of Steel, Jonathan and Martha Kent are afraid that if Clark shows who he is to the world, that the world is going to be afraid of him, that they're going to want to hurt him, experiment on him, whatever it may be. So they kind of raise him in a mildly sheltered way so that he doesn't want to reveal himself. And that's very prominent in the scene where Clark saves his school from the bus crash. And when he goes back to Jonathan, it's a scene that many people have said feels very out of character for Jonathan Kent, which it does for the mainline one, but keeping in mind the fact that I'm talking about as a standalone property, the idea of a Jonathan Kent who, instead of encouraging Clark to go out into the world and save people, actually tells him to let people get hurt and even die, and eventually tells him to let him die in order to keep his secret. It's actually a very interesting and nuanced take, because it's like, we know Superman is a hero, and obviously he's still going to become a hero in this story. He's still going to become Superman. However, this version of Clark is going to have a lot of burden, because once he becomes Superman, then that adds in the emotional depth of, what if I decided this sooner? I could have saved this person, or I could have done this, or I could have saved my dad if I had decided that I was okay with letting the world know that I have powers when I was younger. These are things that we could have explored with his mentality, given how he ends up becoming Superman. And I think that would have been a really cool and interesting way to explore the character. In other aspects, you have the alien aspect. Since Clark is raised in this reserved way, instead of feeling at home where he's always accepted, Clark could feel more isolated, like he doesn't have anyone, which adds a new element of conflict when he finally meets Zod and the other Kryptonians. Because now, instead of it just being like, okay, what is this? Clark is always supposed to feel at home. He's supposed to think that Smallville and Earth is the planet that he loves. He loves the people here. He cares about it. I don't like this Clark that feels isolated and can identify with Zod and maybe wants to join him. But now, if you think of it like, well, maybe this Clark would be interested in joining up with Zod, but seeing what Zod wants to do and hearing that, he's still conflicted because although he didn't get to feel the same level of love and care that comic book Clark has, we still have that sense that Clark still wouldn't want Earth to be destroyed. He has a sense of morality, so that would put him at odds with his fellow brethren from Krypton. And I really think this would have been a very impactful way to view the Man of Steel franchise. But instead, all of these positive aspects of a standalone franchise are looked down upon because people were expecting to see the big boy in blue, truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. All that. We were looking forward to seeing that put on screen as the main Clark Kent and Superman, but we didn't get that because of Snyder's new take on the character, which I don't know how true this is, but I have heard that Zack Snyder wanted to have a multi-movie character arc to bring Clark to the Truth, Justice, and American Way version of Clark Kent that we know in the mainline comics, but on a personal level, I disagree with that. However, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're not here to talk about my personal issues with this because I'm trying to explain to you how these movies can be good if you take them out of the context of continuity and synergy with the comic books. And I think the biggest sell that I'm going to have to get you on is this next one. Oh boy, this movie, I've spent so many years hating this movie and Zack Snyder in particular. I wasn't a fan of Man of Steel. I acknowledged it was a good movie in its own right. However, I did not like Batman v Superman at all. I had my comic book nerdy gripes with Man of Steel, but then Batman v Superman, I didn't like it plot-wise. I didn't like it comic book-wise. I didn't like it at all. It was just so bad to me. And a lot of those issues are still there. I still think Batman v Superman, or BVS, whatever you want to say, the long freaking stupid prologue to Justice League title it has a lot of issues, but I do hate it less than I did back then, now that I'm just thinking of it as the core concepts that were put on display instead of, me being like, well, it's not in line with the continuity of the comics. I don't like the way you're portraying this character. So now that I'm taking a step back out of that and I'm just thinking about it, it's not bad. Like the idea of a Batman who, after living through the events of Death in the Family, snapped and started murdering criminals because he couldn't bear with the fact that he couldn't save Robin is cool as hell. Like, I feel like that would have been a really baller Batman comic. Like, imagine that. If we got, I don't know what you would have called it, Batman Fallen Bird, Longest Night, whatever, some cool Batman title. Not that those ones are cool that I just said, they're actually pretty terrible. But if this was a standalone Batman comic, and it's like, this is the story of Batman snapping after Robin died, and it's his journey to redeem himself after going down such a dark path, that would have been really cool. You could even have like his best friend Superman show up and talk to him and try and like get him back on the right path. You could have done so much with an interesting story with this, and I would have been on board with it. But as it stands in the movie, we are introduced to a Batman that has been Batman for an extremely long time. He's already had Dick Grayson, arguably, because usually Jason Todd is the Robin that dies and he's the second one. So if that stays true, then we have met a Bruce who has adopted both Dick Grayson, trained him as Robin, he's grown up, become Nightwing, left and gone to Bloodhaven. He adopted Jason Todd, he's grown up, got murdered by the Joker, and now he's like a vengeful psychopath that murders and brands criminals. That's a lot of story that we don't know about. And we pick up the movie in that time period. So there's all of this past that we don't know about. And I know that Zack Snyder said he wanted to make a comic book talking about that past, but it never happened. It doesn't exist. And if it does happen in the future, that would be cool. But as it stands right now, it doesn't exist. So we have this Batman with a rich history that we don't know that is now violent, way more violent and murderous than the Batman that we identify with and are used to. So immediately you were extremely put off by this character because it isn't in the same vein of like, oh, he's just a little bit more violent, so he needs to reel it in just a bit, and then he'll be better. You know, kind of like how in The Batman, he's a little bit more violent and vengeful, and he learns by the end of the movie he needs to reel it back in. But this Batman kills people and brands them and sends them to prison to be murdered. And you're like, okay, I don't know how you're going to come back from this because I don't like you in this place to begin with. And seeing him go through that arc is entertaining. I did like seeing that. Didn't like it at the time because I didn't want that version of Batman as the main one. However, seeing it as just an isolated Batman would be really cool. I would like to see that one-off Elseworld story, seeing Batman recovering himself after going through such a tragedy. That would be awesome because Batman has killed in the past, whether it be an alternate version of him, like Thomas Wayne, or it's just like the supervillain versions of him, like the Red Death and the Joker Who Laughs. Either way, there are Batmans who kill in the comics, but they're usually other universes or standalone stories, so they don't affect the main line where people are like, we like a Batman who doesn't kill, so let's not have him kill because we identify and like with that core aspect of the character. And I completely understand that. I think Batman is at his best when he doesn't kill people. But this story could have been done really well on its own. If it was just a single Batman movie where it's like he's grieving Robin and he's going too far, that'd be sick. I'd be sold on that. And that is just one of the many, there's so many things in this. Another aspect that I think works really well, obviously, you can't talk about Batman v Superman without Superman. In this movie, people start viewing Clark as a god, and you could play a lot with that of Clark struggling, of wanting to be a god or not wanting to be a god. We don't know because this is a new version of Superman that grew up without the same ideology of, do for others because you have the power and it's nice and that's what you should do. You should want to just help people because helping people is the right thing to do. This is a Clark who was raised to not help anyone, to hide himself. And now that he's decided to help people, you could play with the idea of maybe he's starting to feel himself. Maybe he's starting to enjoy this whole thing of people viewing him as a god. Or you can go in the opposite direction and have him be like, I don't like people viewing me as a god. I'm not a god. I'm just a guy who wants to help. I just happen to have these abilities that most humans don't. You can go either way with that and tell a very interesting story about it. And you could also have Batman be at odds with Superman. He could fear this god like it does in the movie currently, and they could be at odds with each other. You could have it be that Superman is starting to view himself as a god, and Batman is humanity fighting back and grounding him to make him realize that he shouldn't view himself in that way, that his powers are to help people. Or you could try and dabble with what the movie tried to do but didn't have the time because of all the clutteredness, and have Superman be like, listen, I'm not a god, I'm just a guy who's trying to help people, and I want you to realize I don't want to hurt anybody. And you could go that way and tell an interesting story with that. But I feel like this movie kind of fumbled the bag with that, talking about the writing point of view. Maybe I'll do a video on Batman v Superman in the future and talk about like how there are a lot of plot inconsistencies and things that don't really make sense in the movie as a whole, but we'll see. Let me know if you would like to see that in the future, but we're still not done with all of the ideas that Snyder had in Batman v Superman before we move on Justice League, so I'm going to keep going. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman being a hero who, after losing her love, decided to stop being a hero and has just kind of been living out life throughout history, just letting things happen, is such a cool concept. I like that idea a lot. Seeing Diana just kind of reserved and like, oh man, I have lost everything that I really care about. I can't go home. I don't have the man I love. I don't care. I'm just going to just vibe and just live throughout history in kind of this soul brooding style of myself until she's like, you know what? Maybe I do need to come back. Maybe I do need to fight when she sees Batman and Superman struggling to protect Metropolis and Gotham. That's cool. I like that a lot. Because, I always view Diana as someone who's extremely courageous and brave and the first one to jump into a fight if things are going wrong. But seeing this version of her that's willing to let things go and just let bad things happen because she doesn't have the emotional stability to fight is really cool. I really do like Diana's portrayal, like this concept for Diana. It's really good. I really hoped that they would have done something with that, but we kind of don't really get much with that going forward because the movies in the future have been, Diana in the past, and we wanted, more comic book Diana that's, like I said, more courageous and more willing to step in the fray, which we do see a bit of that in the previous movies, but we haven't really seen like afterwards, like this Diana who's like hidden herself and then moved forward, she's kind of just snapped back to being how we expect her to be from the comics, which is weird. But that idea of Diana is cool, and I would have loved to see it, but that's not how people took it. It was more just like, why is Diana just doing this? Diana's not the kind of person that would do this. Diana would be in the fray. She'd be in the fire, in the trenches with everybody. Da 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 do. And it's just like, okay, yeah, but we're not talking about how she should be. We're talking about what's here, and what's here isn't a bad concept. It's something that on paper sounds good and could have been executed well in its own story, but here in the midst of Batman v Superman, we don't really get to explore her emotional depth. It's just kind of like, I'm here, I'm gonna flirt with Bruce a little bit, and then I'm gonna fade away, and then Doomsday's gonna show up, and then whoa, I'm back to being Wonder Woman. I'm back to the way you guys expect me to be from the comics. Let's fight. And it's like, okay, I have remarks, but they could have done something with that. And then, speaking of Doomsday and Superman's death and this whole pseudo team up of like the OG Justice League, that's actually not a bad idea. Honestly, having a bunch of heroes team up coincidentally to stop Doomsday because he's such a threat, and then Superman's death being the catalyst to make them realize they need to team up because the world needs heroes that work together, is such an awesome idea. I know it's been done before, like in the Justice League War animated movie where all of the heroes kind of just teamed up with each other to face off against Darkseid. I get that it's something that happened before, or in the Justice League animated series where the White Martians attacked and they all teamed up and formed the Justice League. I get it. It's not a new idea by any way, shape, or form, but it's still a really good one that kind of got wasted here because this plot line of Doomsday and them needing to team up just kind of happened in like the last 30 or 40 minutes of the movie, where it's just like, hey, we need a big fight to end off the movie. Boom, Doomsday, he's here now, he exists. I think that's really all I have to say about Batman v Superman. Oh yeah, actually no, one last thing. Tweaky Lex Luthor. Terrible idea. Never should have been done. I know a lot of people defend Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of this Lex Luthor. It sucks. I know this whole video has been talking about good ideas if you take it outside of the context of synergy and continuity-wise, but no. This is a bad idea either way. Tweaky, crackhead Lex Luthor is not a good idea. Screw you, fight me. Last but not least, we have Zack Snyder's Snyder Cut of the Justice League. And honestly, there isn't really much to say about this because it's very weird when it comes to the Snyder Cut, because it feels like he course corrected really hard when it came to this movie. The previous two movies feel like him. They feel like he had a new take on the characters that he wanted to express to his audience. But then you get to the Snyder Cut, and all of the characters start acting more like they do in the mainline continuity of comics. Like, Batman feels more like Batman. He's not as dark and brutal as he was before. I mean, his armament on the Batmobile still has guns because he's fighting aliens, but they're parademons. No one cares if they die. The Flash is kind of goofy, and I don't like this portrayal of Barry Allen. I'm not even gonna lie. I don't like this portrayal of Barry Allen, but he was entertaining enough, and I didn't hate him to a horrendous degree like I did in Joss Whedon's cut of Justice League. He was more bearable in this, but I didn't like him that much either. Cyborg was pretty cool and pretty faithful to at least the Cyborg that I kind of grew up with Teen Titans. I liked him in this movie. I kind of wish he was a little bit more high-spirited, but I understand this is right after he became Cyborg, so maybe not in the best spirits given the fact that you're stuck in a robot body forever. Wonder Woman, she's back to being her normal self that you would expect her to be, and Clark, he starts to act more like the Superman we expect him to be. He even does the iconic like shirt rip open thing at the end of the movie just to show like how much he's grown to the Superman we know and love in the comics. And Aquaman is well, I've heard Aquaman's very different. I've never read an Aquaman comic, so I don't really want to speak much about Aquaman because I don't know much about him, but I've heard he was different, but he's still cool in the movie. Snyder Cut is more in line with the comics than the previous two movies, so there aren't really that many crazy ideas that branch off. That's like, oh, people look down on this because it didn't do this and they were expecting this. No, from at least what I've seen, most people received the Snyder Cut fairly well. I know there are obviously people that didn't like it, but on a general consensus, people seem to like Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League. So people didn't really have any big gripes with it, and I can see why. It's because it felt more like a Justice League movie that people were expecting to see, and that's why people wanted him to continue making these movies because they felt he was moving in the right direction now. They felt he had a handle on what the fans wanted, and that's why there are people out there that still want him to continue being at the helm of the Snyder universe that he had started. And yes, I am aware of the recent news that there were a bunch of crazy Snyder Cut fans that made bots to harass Warner Brothers to release the Snyder Cut in the first place. But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about like genuine fans that saw Justice League and were like, you know what? I can see where he's going with this. I would actually like to see him continue it. So, I don't know. There aren't really ideas here present that I see that I'm like, oh, that's a glaring thing that people had a problem with because it's not like the way they expected it to be. This one is more just like, it was good. People liked it. That's about it. So I think that's really about it. Throughout this whole video, I really hope you have an idea of what I was trying to say. All of Zack Snyder's ideas and concepts weren't bad for the most part. Again, I still, to this day, to the end of time, will hate Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. I will never like it. Anyway, but the synergy between comics and movies is something that's going to be more commonplace nowadays, with comics even starting to release with things in movies that haven't happened yet. Like the Shang-Chi comic that recently came out before the movie introduced the concept of Shang being the son of the Mandarin before the movie came out. Because I remember his father used to be Fu Manchu. If I remember correctly, Shang's father used to be Fu Manchu before they changed it to be the Mandarin. And that comic came out before the movie, and then the movie implemented that. But it's like, did they change that because they were coming out with the movie, or did the comic happen to come out right before it and then the movie did? So you're seeing how like there's this weird blurry line now in between comics and movies because they want that full-on synergy between everything. Hell, it's even why the Marvel shows on Disney are direct copies of what they look like and more or less what they act like in the movies themselves. They're trying to have this unified thing so that all the fans who see the movies could then watch the shows, and then vice versa. All the fans that watch the shows could then see the movies and buy the comics. It's like trying to create like a triangle where everything, just flows into each other. And I understand that. It's a good business model. However, that kind of kills the individualism with things, and it forces people to not like fresh ideas. So when Snyder did his movies, people were like, I don't like this because it's not like what I remember, instead of being like, okay, I'm willing to see where he's going with this because this is clearly a new take and his vision on this universe. So at the end of the day, I hope in the future people are more willing to accept these things. I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably not, if I'm being perfectly honest. I will try to accept these things, but like if I'm watching a DC movie and I'm expecting to see something that I've been waiting and dying to see on screen for a very long time, and it's adapted in a weird way that just doesn't feel right to me, I'll probably still be upset and I'll probably complain about it, and then over time like this, I might feel less angsty about it. Because at the time when Batman v Superman came out, the last Batman we had was in the mid-2000s with the Dark Knight movies, and those were isolated individual movies, which is probably why I like them more. I mean, they're just phenomenal movies, but still. Then you get to Batman v Superman, it's like, this is the Batman that's going to be in the main universe. Look at his suit, it looks all comic booky, and then it's just like, oh, he doesn't act anything like I would like him to act. I don't like this. But then you have standalone movies like The Batman, which he acts basically the same way he does in the comics. It's weird. It feels like they're doing it the wrong way. They should have the universe be with the synergy, and the standalone movies be the ones that are the outliers. But we'll see what they do in the future. They have more plans. Obviously, it's not as concrete as Marvel, but we'll see how everything ends up going. And that being said, I believe that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you managed to make it to the end, please, if you can, like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends. And at the end of the day, I'm the innocent villain. And remember, folks, you're innocent until proven villainous, and I will catch you in the next one.